This is a key to the worksheet on reflections and stretches and compression. Now, number one, you're given this absolute value function, and it says the graph of x is shown below. So there's the graph. And in the same coordinate plane, graph the function g of x, where g of x is f of negative x. Now, remember, if you have this right here, that's that negative out front of f of x means a reflection about the x-axis. So this is a reflection about the x-axis. Now, when it's this right here, see how it's inside, not outside? That's a reflection about the y-axis. So y equals f of negative x is a reflection about the y-axis. So that means I take f of x and reflect it about the the y-axis. So reflect about the y-axis. Okay. All right. So I'm going to take each of those points on this function f of x, and I'm going to reflect it about the y-axis. Okay. So remember, when you reflect about the y-axis, the y coordinate stays the same. See that? The y coordinate stays the same. It's the x coordinate that changes. So the x coordinate changes. All right, so keep that in mind. So the y coordinate stays the same. The x coordinate changes. All right, so for example, if I look at this point right here, which is, let's see, this one here, which is 2, 5. So that's 2, 5. When I reflected about the y-axis, see how this is 2 units from the y-axis? I'm going to go 2 units this way. So that becomes the point negative 2, 5, right? So negative 2, 5. So you reflected about the y-axis, the y-coordinate stays the same, the x-coordinates are opposites, okay? So 2 becomes negative 2. And notice those are rays, so all you have to do is just since this is a ray, just look at the endpoint and look at another point of the graph, and then the same thing here, or on that ray. So here's that endpoint. So you see this endpoint here, which is negative 2, 1. So when I reflect that point about the y-axis, okay, so negative 2, 1, remember the y-coordinate stays the same, the x-coordinates become opposites. So when I reflect it about the y-axis, it becomes the point 2, 1. So 2, 1 is right here. All right, now if I take this point, let's see this point here. So that point on this ray is, let's see, that's negative 6, 5. So negative 6, 5. So when I reflect that point about the y-axis, it becomes the point 6, 5. So 6, 5 is right here. Okay, so that'll be the point 6, 5. And so basically, you're just going to now take a ruler and just graph f of negative x. All right, so we're going to get something like this. Don't forget the arrows, because those are rays in both situations. And you get this. All right, so what I've just drawn right here is g of x, which equals f of negative x. All right, so that is the reflection of this this function f of x about the y-axis. Okay. All right. Now let's look at this one. So number 2, you're given some points here. You're given a set of ordered pairs. So each of those points is on the function g of x. Totally different function than this. So it's on the function g of x, and you want to find what would this point become if you were to graph g of 1/4 x. So I know that on g of x, this is the point. So if I graph g of 1/4 x, this point becomes what? And if I graph 2 times g of negative x, what does this point become? All right, let's do this one first. This one's easy because we all know what this means. So let me go ahead and write out what that part right here means. So y equals 2 times g of negative x. Okay, so remember, if I cover up the 2, you know what this means. This means right here that I reflect g of x about the y-axis. So that's what this means. So remember, g of negative x says I reflect R-E-F-L-E-C-T. So I reflect g of x about the y-axis. So we just talked about that. That's this part right here. That's what we talked about. So that means that every point in g of x, I'm going to reflect about the y-axis. Okay? And then once I do that, then I'm going to multiply the y-coordinate by 2. All right. So let's think about it this way. So this says, now remember when you reflect about the y-axis, remember what we did. So we reflect about the y-axis, the y-coordinate stays the same, the x-coordinate changes. All right, so become opposites. All right, so this says this. Now we're going to go ahead and do it from left to right. So this says I take my y-coordinate, take the y-coordinate of the point on g of x and multiply by 2. Multiply by 2. That's what that says. Okay? Then take the point and reflect it about the y-axis, right? Reflect about the y-axis. You're going about the y-axis. So when I reflect about the y-axis, remember what changes. The y-coordinate stays the same. The x-coordinate changes. They become opposites. So this says, then take the x-coordinate and multiply by -1. Okay? So that's what that says. All right, so let's think about this. So let's look at this point right here. -6, 2. -6, 2. So -6, 2, according to this, says this. First of all, I'm going to take the y-coordinate, and I'm going to multiply by 2. So here's my y-coordinate. So that becomes the point -6, 4, right? So that's that first transformation. So first step. All right, then I'm going to take that point, and then it says this. Take the x-coordinate, multiply by -1, because that's a reflection about the y-axis. So the x-coordinates become opposites. So the opposite of a -6 is a +6. So the point -6, 2 becomes +6, 4. Okay? All right, so let's remind ourselves what this is. So this says, right here, this says, I multiply the y-coordinate, by 2, and then reflect about the y-axis. So when we reflect about the y-axis, the y-coordinates become opposites. I'm sorry, the x-coordinate become opposites, because remember let me look at this. Let me remind you. So when you reflect about the y-axis, remember the y-coordinates stay the same. The x-coordinates are opposites. All right, so the x-coordinates are opposites. So basically this means, when you reflect about the y-axis, this means multiply x by -1. That's what that means. You take the opposite of x. All right, so that's what you saw here. So -6, 2, do it in steps. First step, multiply the y-coordinate by 2. So the y-coordinate here is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Then the next step, second step, says then I take the x-coordinate and I take the opposite of it, which means the same thing as multiplying by -1. The opposite of -6 is a +6. And there's the answer. So this point here, -6, 2, becomes the point 6, 4. Okay? And then when you do this one, if you look at 4, -10, let's look at 4, -10 with this. 4, -10. So 4, -10, the first thing I need to do is I need to take the y-coordinate and multiply by 2. So the y-coordinate here is -10. -10 times 2 is 20. -20, rather. Then the second thing I got to do is I got to take the x-coordinate and multiply by -1. So this x-coordinate is 4. 4 times -1 is a -4. Okay, which kind of makes sense because when you reflect about the y-axis, the x-coordinates are opposites. 4, -4. All right, so this point here becomes -4, -20. 0, 5, let's look at 0, 5. So 0, 5, becomes, so the first step says I take the y coordinate multiplied by 2. So that's what it says, right? Take the y coordinate multiplied by 2, and then I'm going to reflect it about the y-axis. So when I take the y coordinate multiplied by 2, 5 times 2 is 10, so it becomes 0, 10. Then the next thing I got to do is I got to take the x coordinate and multiply by negative 1. 0 times negative 1 is still 0, so it becomes a point 0, 10. So 0, 10 goes here. So this 0.05 becomes the 0.010 on this function. And then 3, negative 1, do the same thing. 3, negative 1. So when I do the first step is to multiply the y value by 2. Sum of y value is negative 1. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Then this says I take my y coordinate, so I'm sorry, take the x coordinate, multiply by negative 1. So this number and this, the x coordinate here and the x coordinate here have to be opposites. So 3 times negative 1 is negative 3, and then negative 2. All right, so that becomes a point negative 3, negative 2. All right, now remember in one of your lessons you talked about this. So this right here is a horizontal transformation. So that's a horizontal transformation. So let's remind ourselves about that lesson there were 2 lessons that you looked at, horizontal transformation. And so if we look at that lesson, let me go ahead and get that lesson for you. All right, so it's this lesson here, and there was another lesson in another lesson that you looked at, but I'm going to look at this lesson in particular. So here's my absolute value function right here. See this one, y equals absolute value of x. So that's my parent function. So when we have, when I want to graph y equals absolute value of 2x, which is what we're looking at this idea here, 1/4 x, so 2x. So remember, that's a horizontal transformation. Now I want you to notice what happens though. If I take this point right here, and I'm going to write it out, this is 4, 4. When I take that point 4, 4, and I transform it to this, and I move this point to this graph right here, the point 4, 4 transforms to 2, 4. Okay? So I want you to notice the y coordinate stays the same because this is a horizontal transformation. So you go horizontally this way or horizontally this way. So those are horizontal transformations. So remember, horizontally, the y coordinate stays the same. So that's why you see the y coordinate staying the same. It's the x coordinates that change. Some students mistakenly think they have to multiply x by 2. That's not the case when you do a horizontal transformation. So look at what happened. So you can take 4, 4 becomes 2. So don't multiply 4 by 2 because 4 times 2 is 8. So to go to this point here, to get this 2, you got to divide by in this case, 2. So basically, you're taking the x coordinate and you're multiplying it. You're multiplying this x coordinate by the reciprocal of the coefficient. So the reciprocal of 2 is 2. So you can say 4 times a half is 2. Same thing here. Look at this one. This right here, the x coordinate is 3. 3 times a half is 1.5. So you see that's 1.5 right here. When you look at, let's see, this point here, let's do this one. This here. So that's the x coordinate 1. 1 times a half is 0.5. Okay? So that's a horizontal compression. Now when you do this one, so notice this point here, this point becomes this point. So that's that point right here, 8, 4. So again, notice the y coordinate stays the same. It's the x coordinate that changes. So to go from this point to that point, I'm going to take the x coordinate multiplied by 2, which means I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/2 is 2. So you're basically saying 1 divided by half, which is 2. So that means the reciprocal. 1 divided by half, which is 2. So you can take 4 multiplied by 2, which is 8. So when we go back here, so this says I'm going to take each of those x coordinates and I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of this coefficient. So this, I'm going to write it right here. So this says multiply each x coordinate on the point of g of x, and multiply each x coordinate by the point of g of x by, and you take the reciprocal of this, so it'll be by 4. Okay, and so let me go ahead and write it out on here. All right, so remember we're dealing with this, so it's y equals g of 1/4 x. So what that means is you're going to take the x coordinate on the point of g of x, on every point of g of x, and multiply by the reciprocal. So it's always, so in this case, it'd be 1 divided by 1/4, which is 4. So it's, so this is y equals g of, let's say, cx. If this is c right here, that means you're going to multiply x by 1 divided by c. So that's what it means. The reciprocal of c means 1 divided by c. All right? And so then when we look at this point here, negative 6, 2 becomes the point. Remember, this says I take the x coordinate, multiply by 4. So it becomes the point. Negative 6 times 4 is negative 24. The y coordinate stays the same. This point here, so I'm going to put negative 24, 2. All right, this point here for negative 10 becomes the point. So I take the x coordinate, multiply by 4. Becomes a point 16. The y coordinate stays the same. So that's 16, negative 16 rather, negative 10. Okay? And then this point here, 0, 5. 0, 5. Remember, there's only one transformation, and that is to multiply the x coordinate by the reciprocal of 1/4. So multiply by 4. So 0 times 4 is still 0. So 0, 5 stays 0, 5. And then 3, negative 1. So I take 3, multiply by 4. That becomes the point. 3 times 4 is 12. So it becomes a point 12, negative 1. And so let me go ahead and write it out. So that's 0, 5. And then 12, negative 1. And that's it. So that is the key to this worksheet. So the first part dealt with the reflection about the y-axis. So remember, when you reflect about the y-axis, the y-coordinate stays the same. The x-coordinates are opposites. And then here, just make sure you understand each of those transformations. So remember, this is a reflection. This part here is a reflection about the y-axis, and then I take the y-coordinate and multiply by 2. This here, which is the more difficult one for students, is a horizontal transformation. So that says I take each of those x-coordinates and I multiply by the reciprocal of this coefficient. And that's it. So that is the key to this worksheet.